Check 1, 2. Check, check. You hear me on the Zoom? Check, check. Microphone check. Check, 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 check. Microphone. Let's turn down left. Sorry. Okay, do what you're doing. Oh, that's because it's still going through. Check, check, check. I'm muted in there. Through. Check 1, 2. Zoom audio. Original sound. Check. Check, check, check. And go back over here. Back over there. I had audio earlier. Let's check OBS. Check, check. Check, check, check. No, I'm not getting any audio in. Check, check. There it goes. Unplug it and plug it back in again. Can you hear me, David? Awesome. Give us 1 sec, and we are going to get you going in the room.
Okay. Oh, great. Hello, everybody. Could we let's get started now for our final keynote remarks. So we're so honored and delighted to have David Manderscheid to give our final keynote address. David actually has a long history with Utah. His first job, his PhD was at Yale in representation theory, which is the same area of mathematics that our dean, Peter Trappa, did his PhD in. And however, as I said, David has a strong connection to Utah. His first job was at the University of Utah. He was a postdoc here. And so that made it a little bit easier to try to get David to come out to Utah. And anyway, David has been a professor and various administrative posts at Ohio State. And most recently, he's at University of Texas, Knoxville. He's a professor of mathematics and the provost and senior vice chancellor. He's a fellow of the American Mathematical Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And currently, he's serving as the division director for mathematical sciences at the National Science Foundation. And so with that, please, David, we're so pleased to have your remarks on NSF's perspective on these issues. Thanks.
Sure. And as was pointed out, my first job was as a postdoc at Utah. And in fact, when I stepped down as provost in 2021, when a new chancellor came in at Tennessee, I got a year off from teaching to get back into my research. And I made three trips actually to Utah, to southern Utah for hiking to the Canyonlands. So Utah does have a special place in my heart. I just wish I could be there today for this talk. I was supposed to fly in yesterday, took a terrible delay at National. It just didn't make any sense for me to fly in, given that I was going to miss the dinner last night, get in very late, et cetera, or maybe not at all. So hopefully this reduced carbon footprint of me talking to you will be acceptable. I apologize for not being able to make it, however. And I'll keep my remarks fairly brief because I really want to hear your comments and your suggestions to NSF, to myself. And but I do have about 15, 20 minutes of a little bit of a slideshow PowerPoint that I'll start with. And so maybe I'll start by sharing my screen if I can pull that up. There it is. Can you see my slides? Are we good?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. So let me start. What I'm going to talk about is NSF funding for building a resilient planet, and that's the terminology we use around here. That's the language you use. You'll see how we talk about it when I get there. But first, I'm going to assume that there are some people that don't know a lot about the National Science Foundation, so I'm just a high-level view. And even for those of you who do know a lot about the National Science Foundation, you may not think about it at this higher level. So roughly $10 billion budget, we get roughly 40,000 proposals a year. We fund roughly 11,000 proposals a year. And one thing we're very proud of is 93% of the money that comes in the door goes out as grants. So our overhead is pretty low, it's 7%. And then some various numbers there also. The mission of NSF, basically progress of science, promoting the progress of science, curiosity-driven research that's done with an eye toward increasing the U.S. prosperity, national health, welfare, and secure the national defense. But unlike most other federal agencies in the research space, in the research funding space, our focus is on curiosity-driven science. What if questions that intrigue us, and then not necessarily have an application the next day or the next year. But that's changing a little bit at NSF now, so I want to comment on that. So NSF is divided into various directorates, offices. I'm division director for the Division of Mathematical Sciences, which is part of the Mathematical and Physical Sciences Directorate. But there's biology, engineering, integrative activities. That's sort of a catch-all for new things that are going on. Computer information science and engineering, geosciences, that's where a lot of climate work is done. Most climate work is, they're the steward of that, including the polar programs. Social, behavioral, and economic sciences, STEM education, that might not be a name you know. It used to be called, that's the directorate formerly known as Education and Human Resources, renamed just last fall. International Science and Engineering is an office. And then I left off one directorate just to emphasize it in the next. Down at the bottom, Technology, Innovations, and Partnerships. And that's the brainchild of our director, Dr. Panchanathan. And it basically is NSF doing use-inspired science, talking about how what we do that's curiosity-driven, how that can become use-driven science. And that's the new directorate. And that's driven a lot of the NSF budget of late. So I'll comment on that as we go through. Proposals are reviewed on two criteria: intellectual merit, broader impacts. How good's the science? How does it benefit society? That could take the form of leading to new applications of laser technology, or it could lead bringing more people into science, for example, two examples of broader impacts. Societal impact either through workforce or through science that has applications. The big news around NSF is last fall, last August, the passing of the CHIPS Plus Science Act. And what that did was Congress authorized the doubling of the budget for NSF over the next 5 years. Not in general, but in targeted areas. And this past this current fiscal year rather, started in October of 22 and ends at the end of September of this year, saw a $1 billion increase in the budget of NSF from roughly $9 billion to $10 billion. And most of that was inspired by the use-driven science about the workforce development. So what are the priorities of NSF? How are these reflected in that? The three priorities that at NSF are in alignment with the White House and Congress. Strengthening and establish NSF. That's like things like my programs in mathematical sciences, what NSF has been doing for 70 years. The second pillar of NSF's priorities is inspiring the missing millions. How do we bring more people into science? More people from groups underrepresented in science, more people from areas that don't typically send people into science, for example, engaging community college students, for example. And then third, the new pillar, that's the Technology Innovation Partnerships pillar, accelerating technology and innovation, bringing technology to speed and scale more quickly. And then within those three pillars, there are four crosscuts that I will emphasize. First, advancing emerging industries for national and economic security. So this is things like AI, so artificial intelligence, biotech, quantum computing, things like that, and doing that in all three areas. Second, the one of relevance here, build a resilient planet. And I'll talk more about that as we go forward. Third, create opportunities everywhere. So that means, they were just announced earlier this week, regional innovation engines in 43 locales across the United States, $1 million each, to set up places where technology and innovation will be accelerated, and through partnerships with local government, with local industry, to bring it to use earlier. And then research infrastructure, these are the big science tools, things like telescopes, things like next generation gravitational wave detector, LIGO, and things like that. So NSF, in the fiscal year 24 request, the president's request to Congress, hits all these areas. It proposes an 18% increase over our fiscal year 23 budget. And remember, the increase last year was just about 11%. So a bigger increase. The president asked last year for 18% also and got the 11. And we'll see what Congress does with this. I mean, there's concern, among some parties that we need to cut spending. Others think we have to compete with China. Those types of things are entering into discussion. But first, the debt limit has to be resolved. But the proposal is 18.6% increase. It probably will be much less than that, but who knows? Congress is just deciding that, and that will start in October. So where does Resilient Planet fit in that? That's my next slide. Yeah, so Resilient Planet, fiscal year 22 actuals, how much we spent, that was directly tied to that initiative, 1.3 billion of the 10 billion budget. Now you see down below, I'd say plus additional program funds of roughly 0.5 billion. That 1.3 billion doesn't capture some of the things that take place within the divisions. But the big line item within the budget, so for example, if somebody's doing something that's uncertainty quantification around wildfires in the statistics program within the mathematical sciences, that might not be in that 1.3, it might be in that 0.5. Fiscal year 23, it's projected we'll spend 1.4, so just a little less than a 10% increase. Remember, the budget went up over 11%. And that's reflected in the fact of how much is being poured into the new Technology and Innovation Partnerships Directorate. Fiscal year 24 proposed 1.6 billion. And that 1.6 you can divide into two buckets. Clean energy technology, just over 500 million, 550 to be exact, and U.S. Global Change Research Program, 1.05. That's a big bucket. The U.S. Global Change Research Program refers to the mandated cooperation between 14 federal agencies doing research around climate change and global change. Those 14 agencies coordinate, and NSF's share of that big bucket is 1.05. And what influences NSF's view on this is, I think, well, there are a number of things. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about all of them, but I'll point to one thing here. So a report that came out last year, consensus study report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on next generation Earth system science at the National Science Foundation. And here, the bottom line, the takeaway is system science, working together, working across boundaries. And so NSF's role in that to advance, innovate, and nurture those system approaches, and to inform how our society can function as part of the Earth systems for the well-being of communities, regions, and nations of the world. So let me go into, that has 6 parts. Now, I won't go into this in a lot of detail because I want to get to questions and comment time. So curiosity-driven and use-based, use-inspired rather, basic research across spatial, temporal, and social organizational scales. That's important here to talk about various scales, whether you're talking about the micro level of, forever chemicals in water, or you're talking big picture, much more bigger items. Then second, I think this is something that cannot be overemphasized: facilitate the convergence of the social, natural, computational, and engineering sciences to advance science and inform solutions to Earth's systems-related problems. Social sciences are playing an increasing role at NSF. I cannot overemphasize that. For example, in mathematical sciences, we have a program that we just started, including human behavior and epidemiological models. How do you take into account things like vaccine hesitancy? Or something more immediate, if we're talking about climate change, we can tell people till they're blue in the face that you should put your temperature, put your air conditioning at 78 degrees. But are people really going to do that? How do we influence changes in behavior that will reduce taxes on the climate, will reduce greenhouse gases, and those types of questions. Questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So often the impacts of climate change are felt in populations that can least deal with them, live most on the edge. Native American populations and fires in Arizona or California, things like that. And then engagement and partnerships with those diverse stakeholders to benefit. Number 5, this is the one that's most of interest to me from a purely mathematical sciences perspective: observational, computational, and modeling capabilities to accelerate discovery and convergence. And here I'll mention one thing that I'll mention a little bit later. For example, using what are called digital twins. How do you model an ecosystem? How do you model planet Earth? That in a way, how do you build a mathematical model that takes into account all the various scales and also takes into account the changes in data? So you're getting data from sensors. How do you incorporate that? How do you modify the model? That's often called a digital twin. And then workforce. NSF was always about getting workforce up to speed on new areas such as this. Oops, I went backwards, my apologies. Now, I'm going to illustrate, so that's sort of a broad picture. I'm going to illustrate how it plays out within my own division, just to give you an example. And that's just because I know it best. That doesn't mean it's representative at all. DMS's vision and mission: support in research, discovery, mathematical sciences. I mean, there's nothing earth-shattering here. Impact on society, build a vibrant community. Let me give you some examples of how, very specific examples. The first example is a program we have that's called Algorithms for Modern Power Systems. We do this with the Department of Energy, with the Office of Electricity within the Department of Energy. And this is mathematical models, algorithms for how you make power systems, how you make grids, for example, robust. How do you incorporate things like people feeding solar energy in from their panels into the grid, and do so in a way that doesn't, that you're doing it efficiently and you're not overtaxing the grid, and you can take advantage of that. So Algorithms for Modern Power System, this is a program we've had with the Department of Energy for a number of years. Digital twins, I've already mentioned that, building a digital twin for planet Earth, or how do you build a digital twin? There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about this a couple weeks ago. The San Francisco airport has a digital twin. I did not know that until I read the article, where they have taken into account all the sensor data from around the airport to assess when they need to replace things, when they, what, when they can reduce air conditioning in a particular area, when they can reduce heat in a particular area to be more energy efficient. But digital twins, this is something that we will be having a we're funding right now with the National Academies, a study, we're funding it with the Engineering Directorate, with the Computer Science Directorate, with the Department of Energy, with NIH, with the Department of Defense, about how can we bring the digital twins to bear to solve societal problems, take into account how much data we have and how to use that. Another program I'll point to is uncertainty and risk quantification in our statistics. So how do you, I mean, wildfires are extreme events, but that they still happen. And they have a can have a huge impact. So how do you quantify that? How do you quantify the risk, the uncertainty of extreme events, and then workforce, bringing more people into the mathematical sciences with a background that addresses resilient planning. I'll just mention here a grant that one of your faculty has, Ken Golden has, what is called a research training group that's funded in the Division of Mathematical Sciences to bring more people into research around Arctic ice melting. So I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to open it to questions. I wanted to be brief here because I personally don't care for Zoom and PowerPoint. I'd much rather be in person, but that wasn't going to happen. Questions, but also your comments. What should NSF be doing? What do you think NSF is doing right? What do you think NSF could do more of? And I'd just like to have a discussion. So with that, maybe I'll stop my screen share. If I do exit this. And we'll be back with you here.
Thank you so much, David. That was a fantastic talk. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you.
I'll be moderating the questions, and we have one coming in already. What kinds of activities do NSF's portion of the U.S. Global Change Research Program support?
What sort of activities? I mean, modeling around climate change. I mean, this is mostly done in the Geosciences Directorate, as seeing what the impact is, projecting that out, modeling around that. You know, there's a lot of activities, as that $1 billion indicates, but it's mostly around modeling, projecting what will be the consequences of, you know, one degree Celsius, 1.5, and so on and so forth. And then also, how can we mitigate those by various strategies?
How is NSF thinking about increasing this cross-disciplinary collaboration? How do you, are there thoughts and ideas on that?
Yes, I mean, in fact, you know, when I was asked to talk about this, I immediately reached out to my colleagues in Geo, and, you know, we've been collaborating with them for a number of years on various topics. And, you know, one of the things that excited me when I came to NSF is this cross-cutting, the collaboration with the Computer Science Directorate, with the Engineering Directorate, with the Geosciences Directorate. I think people see that system science is the way to go. It's absolutely the way to go, and I'm happy to be a part of that. So in terms of how we're thinking about it, is we put together various working groups. We come up with a topic we might be addressing. I can't, you know, those working groups are internal to NSF. I can't go into the workings of them or what's coming out of them. But for example, we have a working group around digital twins right now with strong representation from the geosciences people. And we'll be having that workshop I mentioned. We'll have the National Academies report on that. We're doing, for example, a special workshop in that coming up, I think in June or July, with the Department of Energy in particular around energy issues around the grid and conservation of electricity.
The next question is the emphasis on innovation and partnership seems to be a very new direction and a quite different direction from the traditional emphasis on basic sciences in the past. Is this an issue for NSF? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because if you look at what the budget increase, the budget went from 9 billion to 1 billion. That's the largest increase ever for the National Science Foundation budget as a dollar amount, and the second largest percentage-wise. So why did the Congress buy into that? What was the selling factor? Well, our director spent a lot of time talking to members of Congress. People at NSF spent a lot of time talking to Congress. We don't lobby them. We talk about what we're interested in, and then they ask us questions, but we don't lobby, let's be clear. And what's clear that resonated with members of Congress, if you look at that 1 billion, 500 million of that goes to the New Technology Innovations Partnerships Directorate. 250 million of it goes to the Education Directorate for workforce programs, including graduate student stipends, increasing the number of graduate research fellowships. So these where Congress and the President have been able to see that their investments have these more direct, shall we say, payouts, they've been more willing to up the budget. The concern comes in a period of what happens if Congress decides there's not money to up the budget. We've made these commitments, we've made these promises around research innovation engines, about bringing NSF to across the country. And will this be to the detriment of basic science? Will this mean a cut for basic science? And that's a concern, but the director is very, very keen on saying, no, that will never happen. And also the director of the technology, the assistant director, to use his title, the assistant director of the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate is very clear that he is partnering with us on these topics. For example, when we talk about digital twins, the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate is very interested in the equity issues around those. If you have a digital twin for a city, is it taking into account all populations of that city? Is it taking into, or if you have a digital twin such as comes out of Rice University of the Gulf coastline, is it taking into account all populations along that Gulf coastline, or is it just taking into account certain segments of Houston's population? Those types of questions are of interest to the Technology Innovations Partnership. But it is, people are right to ask those questions, but so far it's working, and I'm the optimist that it will continue to do so.
What do you see as the opportunities for universities like the University of Utah on the workforce development and growing a robust and diverse workforce in global change and climate?
Right. Well, I think, part of the reason that I was attracted to Utah many years ago for my postdoc was, it was a fantastic math department. Let's be clear about that. That was the primary criteria, especially in representation theory, my field of study. But also the natural environment of the state of Utah is a tremendous asset in that respect. I came also to ski too, and so it's a tremendous asset that really places Utah in a quite unique setting to do that. Then you add in the population growth of the state, the in-migration of the state. You look at how Salt Lake City is growing. Those are real opportunities to expand industry, to expand workforce issues, but also they come with a potential for downsides. You know, are we going to tax the environment too much? What do we need to do to mitigate the effects of that huge influx of population? So I think Utah can really be a test bed for many of the types of topics we're talking about, especially when you see 900 over, what is it, almost 1,000 inches of snow at Alta. I mean, my gosh, you know, is that climate change? Is that what, you know, what is this? And asking those sorts of questions, people will be asking, people will be intrigued. And people do see the effects of climate change in more extreme events occurring more often. And so I think Utah could be a very good, I mean, and the university is, of course, a fantastic university. And so, I mean, I think there really is an opportunity there.
Well, thank you so much for these fantastic and visionary remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for coming to the 2023 Wilkes Climate Summit. From the vision and challenges that our keynote and plenary speakers laid out, to the bold ideas from the Climate Prize finalists, to the fantastic discussions on our expert panels and student posters, I leave today inspired by all of you and what we can accomplish together. I have a number of important thank yous before we adjourn and a quick announcement at the end. First, thank you to Clay and Marie Wilkes for making this all possible. Thank you to our expert panelists who joined us from across the country. Such vibrant and important discussions. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the Alumni House and the College of Science volunteers and staff for helping everything run so smoothly. I want to give a huge thanks to the Wilkes leadership team and the Summit Planning Committee for putting together this agenda and helping us shape the vision of this summit. And finally, an immense thank you to Kyla Welch and Ross Chambliss at the Wilkes Center, whose dedication, passion, and months upon months of hard work made this event such a success. Thank you. Please, if you have not already, go to our website and join the listserv so that we can continue to engage, interact, and work together to move the needle on climate change. We will likely be sending out a survey to those who registered, so please give us your comments and feedback for next year. Thank you all so much, and we will see you at the next Wilkes Summit next year.